The night after the robbery, white tape ran along the glass, my heart knocking like an old refrigerator. I called to ask my son to let me stay. He said, "Get a room." I shut my mouth and opened the ring binder. From here on, the papers will speak. Pry marks, bank statements, camera footage. Do you dare stay to the very end when the truth opens the door on its own? The night opened like a sheet of dark oil paper, thin and cold. The glass door had been crisscrossed with blue tape. The diagonals both held and displayed the cracks like a spider web, each junction still dusted with fingerprint powder, fine as ash. The smell of powder mingled with the night air, a faint sweetness of the tape's resin, and the thin metallic smell of a lock freshly pried. He set the key on the wooden tabletop, where the old coffee ring still was, and stood still for a long time, one hand gripping the other wrist as if holding a small bird beating its wings. The whole house had the emptiness of a room after someone has left too quickly, a drawer off its notch, a chair skewed from its familiar place, a lone sock fallen by the lamp base. On the porch, the light flickered once and went steady, as if swallowing an explanation. He turned on the stove. The blue flame sounded like paper tearing. The old coffee pot was set back on the grate, heavy in the hand and still strong with the smell of the last boil. While he waited, he laid his palm against the pot, not to test the heat, but to borrow a little warmth to press against the trembling. Fear, when it has passed its hour, no longer has a clear shape. It is the chill draft slipping in through the crack at the door, the rustle of an advertising leaflet stirred by the wind, the dry clack when the screw on the door frame expands. He lifted the pot, poured slowly, listening to the coffee touch the cup like a heartbeat trying to keep steady. Each sip was a way of telling himself, still here, still able to breathe. On the phone shelf lay a scrap torn in haste from an old notebook. He wrote, his letters neat as if the ink lines could gather what was breaking. Stay elsewhere for a few days. Change the lock tomorrow morning. The dash was longer than usual, like a thin bridge to carry him through the night. He put down the pen, looked at the line for a while, then fixed the scrap to the refrigerator door with a magnet. He listened for the compressor starting up, its steady vibration like a lullaby without a singer. He wanted only that sound in the night, a stable rhythm in place of the hollow widening in his chest. The kitchen had witnessed long mornings and late nights, but tonight it felt estranged, like an old acquaintance avoiding his eyes. He moved slowly around the room, bending to pick up the tiny shards of glass fallen near the table leg. Each piece was a miniature flash of solitude, no one to pick them up with him, no voice saying, "Leave it till tomorrow," only the steady breathing trying to keep time. He gathered the glass into a paper bag, tied it into a light bundle, set it by the trash, a small gesture to return a measure of order to a space just disturbed. At the door, the blue tape crossed at right angles, the edges slightly wrinkled, like an indoor umbrella meant for a rainless sky. After a while, he realized the sense of betrayal was not radiating from the stranger who had pried the lock. It came from the house itself, that had once held him with the smell of wood, the familiar creak of the floorboards, now gone askew, as if the very walls had turned their backs. He touched the chair with the crack along the armrest, a crack that had once been a funny story and now had become a fine boundary between before and after. A strip of memory flashed, someone's hand once setting a cup into the old ring on the table. That familiar gaze had drifted away from this room sometime he could no longer recall. He exhaled, silently counted 4 beats, then inhaled a resolve not to let fear turn into haste. Protruding at the edge of the rug was a paper clip dropped as a trace of the rummaging. Anger flared a moment by reflex, like a flame that had slipped past the rim of the kettle. He stopped. His thumb and forefinger pinched the clip, set it on the windowsill, aligned it neatly, a small act like pressing the off button on the impulse. The indignation of an older man, he understood, also needed to be put away in the properly labeled drawer, or else the first hand it cut would be his own. He stood in the kitchen doorway, looking through the taped panes, imagining the night road out there, the low eaves, the windows gone dark. In the dim imagining, there was a prospect, the thief caught, a report signed, the belongings returned. He tried to touch that feeling with his mind and realized the hollow at the center did not automatically fill. The refrigerator's hum, perhaps, was in the end what he needed more than a verdict read aloud. That recognition did not make him lighter, but it helped him stop trying to fill the space with heated imaginings. In the middle of the night, he asked himself whether he had been careless to let the porch light flicker for too long, like a signal to strange footsteps. Or was it because the last time he refused a young stranger who asked to borrow the phone, the boy's eyes looked more sad than fierce? The questions took turns biting at the softest part of his conscience, leaving no answer. He felt himself standing between two lines. On one side, a newly sprouted firmness: change the lock tomorrow morning. On the other, the fear of becoming a worse person because of fear. Moral suspicion came as lightly as dust, settling on every surface, including the palm he was clenching. He poured another half cup of coffee, set it on the table, and sat down on the chair with the crack. In front of him was the scrap on the refrigerator door, the letters he had written still standing upright. He leaned his ear close to the door, listening to the compressor start, then start, then stop, regular as the footsteps of an old friend passing down a hallway. Hope, if it had to be named, was now as small as the tiny glow on a switch. There were still things that carried out their part. He would sleep on the sofa tonight, coat folded as a pillow, shoes set parallel on the floor. Tomorrow morning change the lock. As the words had said, no oath needed, only quiet actions lined up. Before turning off the stove, he circled back to the glass door and pressed one more edge of tape flat, a gesture both superfluous and necessary. He turned off the kitchen light, leaving the porch light to breathe softly in the night. The house, even disordered, still accepted his return and set aside a corner for him. Somehow, in the steady hum of the refrigerator and the smell of coffee cooling, he was able to set his fear down on the table as he set down the key. Not hiding it, not showing it off, just leaving it there for the morning. He pulled open the bottom drawer, the place long reserved for things for later. A few old bills, a roll of tape missing its cap, a plastic ruler with a chipped tip. At the bottom lay a thin ring binder, ash gray, resting still like an old sheet of cloud. He lifted it with both hands, testing a weight that was almost nothing. When he snapped the two rings shut, the small metallic click sounded like a sentence closing in on itself. He set the binder on the wooden table right beside the coffee ring, dried there from some other day, and squared it so the edge ran parallel to the grain. The gesture wasn't about neatness. It was like an outstretched hand. This would be his straight back in the days to come. He rummaged in the pin box. Only a single pencil remained, worn down, the wood bearing the dull sheen of years of being gripped tight. He sharpened the tip with a paring knife until the graphite showed a slender length, then blew the shavings away, the dust rising and falling like fine snow. Bracing the binder's spine against the table edge, he carefully drew a faint horizontal line so the letters wouldn't slip. Each stroke was written slowly, each letter given its own space to breathe. House of Evidence. The long horizontal line lay quiet in the middle like a small bridge, linking a place already disturbed to an order he was resolved to keep. When he finished writing, he tilted the binder toward the light and watched the pencil marks catch a soft gleam. Then, with the pad of his finger, he smoothed over each letter, as if hammering in an invisible nail to make it hold. He opened the binder, the two rings parting with a tiny tick. Inside was empty, a white space large enough to swallow any anger if need be. He placed in it a neat brown paper bag tied with string, the shards of glass he had just picked up, not because they held any value, but because he wanted to remind himself that everything has its place. Even broken pieces need to be named and put somewhere. He closed the binder and laid the pencil along the spine, like setting a chopstick beside an emptied bowl, a sign of a dinner no one overtalked. In the kitchen light, the photo frame propped temporarily with tape by the shelf showed its pressure marks clearly. A scratch in one corner ran from the edge almost to the subject's mouth, the smile lightly cut, looking like a streak of wind. He took a microfiber cloth, dabbed it with a little water, and touched it to the glass to clean off the lingering fingerprint powder. The cloth on glass made a soft rustle. He ran his hand along the tape's edge, pressing to seal the tiny air bubbles trapped beneath until the seam lay flat like a strip of river in the season of little wind. Then he set the frame straight again, measuring by eye so it balanced with the table's corner, not out of fear of ugliness, but because he wanted to give that face a solid footing. Evidence, he thought, is not only papers, it is also the small things set square, so that when needed, one can look and know someone tried to live decently here. He returned to the kitchen. The coffee cup from earlier was still warm, a thin breath of steam at the porcelain rim. He lifted it, took a sip, and set it back down into the old ring, not off by a hair. It had been a long time since he'd aimed that precisely. That center point, more than any spoken vow, was a silent fulcrum. On the refrigerator door, the note, "Stay elsewhere for a few days. We'll change the lock tomorrow morning," still lay straight beneath the fish-shaped magnet with the chipped tail. He took another, smaller scrap of paper and added 2 words, "Stay calm," with the nearly spent pencil tip. The letters were so faint you had to lean to see them, like a promise addressed only to himself, needing no witness. He switched off most of the lights in the house, letting the kitchen glow thin and then stop at just enough. Carrying the binder toward the door, he stood a breath's length before the flickering porch light. The gold broke into short pulses of flare and fade, limning the blue tape on the glass, bringing out the sharp edges softened by his hands improvising. He didn't fix anything, only stood and listened. Insects twined with the far sound of a slow garbage truck going by, wind touching the tree canopy and turning a layer of leaves, the refrigerator starting up again inside. Amid those sounds, his heartbeat dropped a notch. Resolve, at this age, is no longer oaths or bursts of rage. It is the way you open a binder in the right direction, the way you set a frame straight, the way you hold your breath a little longer before a blinking bulb. He knew he would call the locksmith in the morning, knew he would have to write a long list, knew he would have to go around to ask a few places, but tonight he needed only to choose a bearing, speak in documents, not in a raised voice. The anger perched somewhere behind his sternum, and his hands stayed busy with small tasks, squaring the corner of the cloth, sliding the chair back into the old shadow mark on the floor, closing the drawer to its familiar notch. Before leaving the threshold, he looked up at the porch light once more. Replace the bulb, he noted to himself, but he did not reach up in haste. Some things ought to be changed by daylight, when hand and eye are clearer. He exhaled, long and even, as if letting some of the night spill into the small yard. Then he turned back inside. The binder lay neatly on the table, the pencil set along its spine, the frame standing in a straight line against the wall. Though the house had lately been forced open, it had, at least to the minimum, regained the order of someone who does not give up. He pulled the thin blanket over the sofa, folded it in half, and set it beside the coat that still smelled of wood and machine oil. The kitchen light went fully out. Only the porch's flicker remained, printing patches of light and dark across the taped pane, like the uneven breathing of someone coming to. House of evidence. The fine pencil letters on the binder's spine may fade with the years, but tonight they were dark enough to lead him through the dark. He rested his palm on the binder for a moment, as one might place a hand on someone's back before sleep, then drew it away. No extra sound. By means of a few small adjustments and a newly labeled spine, the house had found its voice. Silent but ordered, silent but resolute. And he, with a small resolve, had chosen to stand on that side. Morning drew up from the riverbed like a thin mist, cold and damp. The small town opened its eyes with familiar sounds. From the opposite bank, a barge horn stretched on, as if someone were working loose a snarled rope. At the corner, the church's electric sign blinked with letters missing bulbs. T, or stay, free, oop, the letters winking on and off like uneven breathing. The garbage truck went by earlier than usual, the squeal of its brakes scoring a fine line in the air. Then the yellow lights on its tail swept across the fronts of the low-roofed houses. The river wind carried the smell of fresh silt and algae, touched the porch, slipped through the gap where the blue tape crossed the glass door, and left inside a quiet chill, thin as a sheet of paper. In the door jamb, a pizza flyer had been tucked in loosely, off center, one corner curled up, now and then shivering with the draft, tapping very softly against the frame. He didn't pick it up right away. The small things kept to their paths. The mail carrier still shoved in the advertisement. The garbage truck still stopped on its old track marks. The church sign still flickered as it did every week. Only his heartbeat was different, going slow, then fast, then catching, like an old man meeting an unfamiliar step. Inside, the first light of day redrew the familiar markers until they seemed new. On the wooden tabletop lay the old coffee ring, a muted brown like a thin crescent moon, not too big, not too small, exactly where it always lay. He set the cup down, trying to fit it snug, but his hand trembled a little, so the porcelain rim touched just outside the mark with a tiny tick. He slid the cup back. The second time, it hit true. The sense of a small, tight fit could still offer a thread of warmth, like fastening the last button on a cold day. The coat hanging by the door still kept the smell of wood and machine oil, the smell of long shifts at the shop, clinging to the thick fabric like the house's way of remembering who had passed through it. The hem brushed the wall and left a fine dark streak. Beneath the coat were the shoes he had set side by side. To the left, the chair with the crack along the armrest, the fissure branching into three fine, dry roots, held its place. The grain around the crack was slightly polished by the many times his hand had passed over it, smoothing it the way one might stroke an animal to calm oneself. He sat down and pressed lightly on the armrest. It didn't creak. It simply braced as if enduring with him a new weight. The thin binder lay on the table, the pencil-labeled spine reading House of Evidence turned up to receive the early light. The gray pencil marks appeared clear, then dimmed as clouds slid past the taped frame. He nudged the binder so its edge ran parallel to the table's edge, a feeling like setting a backbone back onto its axis. On the wall, the photo frame propped with tape stood in a straight line. A scratch in the glass caught a slant of light and split the smile into two unequal parts. He stepped over and smoothed along the tape edge with a fingertip, as if driving in one more invisible nail only he could hear. The refrigerator in the kitchen corner kicked on and then cut out, a steady rhythm like a metronome keeping the morning's beat. That sound blew a matter-of-fact normalcy into the house. The food still stayed cold. The milk still didn't sour. The door still drew in gently when closed. He steadied the door and checked the fish-shaped magnet with the chipped tail holding the scrap that read, "Stay elsewhere for a few days, change the lock tomorrow morning." The pencil had paled under the damp, but it was still legible. A short line of words, with no pleading, no peak, standing like a small sign planted at the roadside. Outside, the street sweeper passed the intersection, leaving thin threads of water you could see only at an angle. From the church, a scattering of people turned toward the community kitchen, paper sacks in their arms, hats pulled down over their ears. At the corner, the dry cleaner's window hung a board that read, "Will reopen at 9. White letters on red, skewed at one corner by a loose nail, clicking each time the wind slid through. The town was like an old machine starting slowly but sturdily, one gear catching the next with small sounds just loud enough to hear. He turned back to his kitchen and laid a hand on the wooden tabletop. The grain warmed under his palm like a living creature. He opened the tap, and the water ran with a sound as even as a cord tying the house to the river outside. He dried the tabletop not because it was dirty, but because he wanted to restore a normal you could touch. In the sink, a white plate with a few fine scratches lay on its side, reflecting the taped kitchen door into skewed geometries, like a map of a city whose street names had been changed. He hitched the coat straight on its hook and tugged the shoulder line true. The smell of wood and oil surged up and grazed his throat, a small warm rasp that made him cough softly. It was the smell of a working day, the smell of being able to take care of oneself, the smell of a life. He suddenly felt grateful that that smell was still here, not taken along with the things removed from the house last night. However costly what was taken might be, what remained was what let him keep breathing in rhythm. The porch light still flickered, Each time it brightened, it faded again, like someone hesitating. His hand lingered at the switch, but he didn't flick it on and off. He drew his hand back. The bulb would be changed in daylight, when eyes are clear and the ladder steady. A small decision, but enough to give his restlessness a place to sit. On the tile, his own dust-smudged footprints trailed from the door to the table. Steps walked through the long night, now dried and fading under the pass of the rag. From the threshold, looking out, the binder on the table, the coffee cup set snug into the ring, the coat hanging straight, the chair with the crack waiting for another pass of the hand, all of it lined up like low notes, holding the drone for a piece of frightened music that had just finished its first refrain. The town continued its unknown composition outside. The church's sign still blinked. The garbage truck had gone, leaving a street a little cleaner. The pizza flyer in the door jamb still fluttered as if waving. The house, like a small boat tied to a mooring on the bank, rocked just enough, then settled. He laid his palm on his chest and felt the beat less unruly. Not because everything was fine, but because he had found a few small mooring posts, a coffee ring that fit, a spine with words on it, a coat that still held a familiar smell. Outside, the river kept moving. Inside, he stood a little straighter. Everything went on, only his heartbeat changed, and for that very reason, he knew he was still here to put each thing back where it belonged. He stepped out the door while the dew still clung to the low fence. The blue tape on the glass cast a pale gray of early morning, the edges crossing at right angles like the ruled lines of old lessons. He locked the door, checked the handle once more, then slid a small notebook into his inner pocket. The cover was frayed at the edges, the pages grid-ruled. He had written addresses on the first page, a fine pencil line under it, as if a mooring post were needed for the tasks ahead. The town opened into rings beyond the doorstep, each ring with its own sound. The nearest ring was the alley leading to the main road, where gravel mixed with dry grass and leaves slid under his soles with a rasping hush. On the curb, the white paint of the crosswalk had faded, exposing the black asphalt beneath like an old bruise. He counted utility poles. 1, 2, 3 up to the corner with the gas station. The gas station sat on the corner like a night watch booth. Low tin roof, unevenly lit signboard. The words Coffee 99 seemed dim beneath a pane with a semicircle wipe mark. A light smell of gasoline mixed with old fryer oil. A plastic bucket stood by the pump, filled with green soapy water, the squeegee propped against the rim, dropping round beads. He took out his notebook, leaned his back to the pump, copied the small printed address on the silver label stuck to the housing, added corner of Maple and 3rd. The letters ran straight, each character not crowding the next. When he finished, he closed the notebook and listened to the pages brush with a pleasant sound. He crossed the street. The second ring was the row of low-roofed adjoining houses to the west where his son lived. The flat metal roofs tilted at the same angle, old antennas stuck in at a slant like compass needles. The windows hung with light curtains. The front lawns were patchy, green here and bare there, some scarred with diagonal parking tracks stamped into 2 pale lines. On the 3rd porch from the corner, a pair of mud-caked boots sat neatly under a folding chair. On the steps, a child's red-framed bicycle leaned against the railing, the back tire half flat. He stopped in the Maple's shadow line, far enough from the door to be only a passerby. The breeze carried a faint scent of laundry detergent. He didn't write anything here. He only touched the notebook's edge in his pocket, like feeling a flat stone to keep the beat. The next ring was the red brick library block on a small rise, its glass door taped with the opening hours. Under Thursday, the words "Open at noon" were typewritten, black ink even, with 2 crease marks where the sheet had once been tucked into a folder. Inside, through the glass, the shelves ran straight and square. A children's corner had a green rug and a few stuffed animals leaning on each other. The bulletin board posted slow reading class for adults and Thursday online form assistance, the red and green tacks like small beans. He opened the notebook, copied the library's name, the street number on the sign, and noted, "Thursday opens late at 12. The pencil left a thin gray trace on the paper, dark enough to read, light enough not to crack its voice. At the page's edge, he drew a small arrow from home to the library, jotted the estimated poll count as if sketching a private map with his own breath. 3 intersections past the library stood the local police precinct, a brown brick building, 3 stone steps, cold metal handrail. On the door, a notice read, Community Desk 8:00 a.m., 6:00 p.m., and next to it a buzzer for after-hours assistance, its metal face mottled with wear. The flag flapped slowly, its shadow spilling across the ground into moving bands like water. He stood across the street and didn't cross, only looked. Wind slipped through the gap at his collar, reminding him he still carried the smell of wood and machine oil from his coat. He copied the address, added the line, passed 3 intersections, and underlined it once. The underline ran straight, not too hard, like a single knock on a door, loud enough to be heard. On the way back along the river, he passed a 24-hour convenience store, the ATM beeping steadily, the green LED pinning a provisional chill on the faces of those who went by. He didn't go in. He preferred doors you open by hand to automatic doors. On the embankment, a seabird stood on one leg, feathers puffing. The river sounded like an old cassette. Swish, crackle, then hush. He stopped at a wooden bench facing the water, opened the notebook, and checked the lines he had copied. Under each address, he added a small mark, a solid dot for places that gave warmth, the library, a square for essentials, the precinct, a slash for places to pass by, the gas station. His map had no compass, only signs enough to follow when the wind made his mind tangle. Back at his door, the blue tape still caught the light as it had when he left. On the doormat, there were faint new damp marks where the dew had melted. He reached into his pocket, took out the notebook, opened to the first page, and added, Son's house in block 14, blue door, old folding chair, then closed it. The notebook slid into the pocket inside the house evidence binder, next to the worn pencil, with a dry rustle like leaves. The neat lines didn't make anything less complicated, but they laid down an even rhythm for his heart, each address a mooring, each symbol a normal breath. He stood a moment at the threshold and looked out at the rings that had eased back, like ripples after a stone is thrown. The town kept stirring by its own inertia, the church sign blinking, the gas station pumps buzzing, the library quiet until noon, the precinct solid as a large brick. And he, in a house with a taped glass door, set the notebook neatly on the table, the binder parallel to the wood grain. His palm smoothed the paper, warmth spreading across the wood's cool. Everything continued. Only his heartbeat changed, and the straight lines had helped it find an even way through a morning. He pulled the cracked chair closer to the phone shelf. The dim light of late afternoon poured through the blue tape on the window pane, dividing the kitchen into skewed bands of light and dark. On the table, the house evidence binder lay parallel to the wood grain. The worn pencil lay along its spine like a silent latch. He placed the tips of his fingers on the number keys, hearing very soft beeps, like drops of water falling to the bottom of a glass. Each digit was pressed slowly, with pauses, as if switching on one light after another in a dark corridor. The phone rang. 1 beat, 2 beats. On the other end, the TV was on just loud enough to break into scattered patches of sound, someone speaking fast, fidgety commercials, then the sound of a spoon touching the side of a cup with a thin, pin-like tick. He leaned his back against the chair and let out a long breath so his voice wouldn't shake. When the line picked up, he chose the fewest, lightest words, as if setting each item on the table so it wouldn't slide. A corner of the sofa, a few nights, he'd be up early and out, no trouble. There was a quiet blank for a blink. Then the reply snapped out, cold and dry, like a steel door slamming shut. Get a room, I won't house you. The sharp words fell straight through the receiver, finding no place to sit, catching on no edge of any table in the kitchen. The TV on the other side kept talking. The spoon touched the cup once more, with a thin, bright note, like a period. He said nothing more. His tongue rested behind his upper teeth, holding down an he usually used to keep a conversation going. The tabletop under his hand felt cooler than before. The old coffee ring at eye level, pale brown and perfectly round, suddenly seemed to recede an arm's length. At the door jamb, the pizza flyer stirred faintly, trembling with a small draft that slipped through the tape. He lifted his chin and looked through the slit of glass. In memory, the patchy lawn beside the row of low-roofed houses to the west came up, the red-framed bicycle leaning against the railing, the mud-caked boots set neatly under the folding chair. Those things stayed still, despite a sentence that had just fallen and tipped the small balance inside his chest. The line was silent, like a long corridor without windows. He heard his own breathing in the receiver, very faint, then the soft rub of his coat strap against the chair back. The hand holding the handset began to feel heavy. His middle finger slid down to take some of the tiring weight. He thought of the binder on the table, the thin pencil letters on the spine, the two rings closed like a disciplined eyelid. Anger, if there was any, stood tucked in his chest like a creature that wanted to howl but was leashed, giving one jolt and then lying still. From the TV came canned applause, distant and hollow. He recalled the porch light's earlier flicker, those short flashes like the house giving a small shrug. The receiver pressed to his ear warmed the rim of one ear. Nothing more came from the other side. In that gap, he lifted his left hand and set it on the binder, felt the cover thin and cool. One breath, two breaths. He moved the handset a fraction away, as if to ease the weight of the refusal on his ear. The call ended with a tone longer than usual, a thread-like sound, thin and cold, that skimmed the air and settled on his collarbone. He lowered the receiver slowly so the tone wouldn't be cut off, letting it die on its own like a strip of light drawing down into evening. His hand released. The handset clicked softly into its place. The kitchen took back its familiar sounds, the refrigerator starting up once, a drip from the long, unattended faucet falling into the stainless sink, the coat swaying slightly because he had just shifted. He set both palms on the tabletop, his skin warming on the cool wood. Not a single why escaped. He didn't let that question step into the house. On the refrigerator, the scrap "stay elsewhere for a few days, change the lock tomorrow morning" still sat under the chipped tail fish magnet, the pencil marks faint but straight. He adjusted his posture so his spine was upright, inhaled more deeply, counted silently to 4, exhaled to 5. Each breath was a paper clip tightening an invisible stack of files inside him. He let his eyes pass over the tape-propped frame. The scratch cut the smile into two pieces, but the eyes still faced forward. In that gaze, an old calm was returning. He stood, slid the chair back into its exact shadow on the floor, and with his fingertips smoothed the tape edge once more. No vows, no flare of anger, just one thought lining up. What needs to be said will be said on paper. The rest he would hand over to the quiet of the refrigerator's hum. And tonight that quiet began with setting the receiver back in its proper place. He opened the tap until the water ran in an unbroken strand, not breaking into drops. The steady sound filled in for his uneven heartbeat, like laying a thin blanket over a startled animal. He held his hand under the stream for a few seconds, the creases of his palm blanched, then he drew it back. On the refrigerator door, the scrap "stay elsewhere for a few days, change the lock tomorrow morning" stood still under the chipped tail fish magnet. He took another small piece of paper and wrote slowly, "Hotel 2 nights." The pencil drew a clean line. When he finished, he looked at it the way one looks at a door already open in the night. Then he struck it through with a thin, decisive diagonal, letting the words lie down as if someone had just stopped speaking. The slip was folded in half and slid under the lip of the salt shaker, not heavy, not light, just a temporary choice set aside. The water kept running. That sound stretched on like a rope fixing a small, moored boat to shore. He turned the faucet a touch so the sound would be less sharp, so it would carry more breath than metal. On the table, the house evidence binder lay parallel to the wood grain. The worn pencil lay along the spine. He set his palm on the cool cover as if touching the back of a creature that listens. He didn't open it, didn't arrange anything more. Tonight, it was enough that nothing drift away. He drew the coat that smelled of wood and machine oil close to his chest, the collar edge rasping his collarbone a little raw. He turned off most of the lights, leaving only a tea light on the table, the flame low, yellow, flickering like a thin border between staying and leaving. He pulled the chair up to the window taped with blue, sat angled so his back rested against the wall. Outside, the street had few lights. Sparse windows dropped gray rectangles onto the paving. In the dark spaces, a gray cat ran past, tail upright, claws ticking on the concrete. Farther off, a truck went over the bridge, the steel beam ringing along, ooh, like someone drawing a string they don't want to snap. He set the phone face down and pushed it out of sight. A vague reflex to turn it on flickered through him, then went out like the porch light outside, blinking once and stopping. No more messages. Now the words lay on paper scraps, not traveling by signal. He hugged the coat tighter and heard the fabric's soft rasp, like a small insect caught under dry leaves. Wind on the porch slipped through the taped edge, carrying the smell of the river gone cool. Fingerprint powder lingering somewhere in the wood seams gave off a chalky trace, which mixed with candle wax, turned faintly acrid when it ripened. He exhaled through his mouth, slower, as if training his lungs to a new habit. His knees drew up. The chair hinge creaked a little, then held its tongue. The candlelight wasn't enough to show the tabletop clearly, but enough to bring out part of the old coffee ring, like a slice of moon behind cloud. He set the empty cup in the center of that mark no coffee left, only the habit kept in shape. Within the taped frame, the diagonal blue strips cut the night into silent triangles. Through them, he watched small things continue their appointed parts. A bicycle light blinking and then vanishing, the church's sign far off sputtering with missing letter suits, the wind raking a cluster of dry leaves along the curb, then letting them lie. He thought of the crossed-out line, Hotel 2 Nights, of the unfamiliar bed with the smell of bleach that would keep him awake, of the steady air conditioner of a place with no history of his own. Staying, it turned out, wasn't courage. It was only that he wanted to hear his refrigerator more than any other sound. The water at the tap now drowned out every stray heartbeat. He closed his eyes and attended to the lessening volume of himself in the room. Under the coat, his fingers found each other, interlaced and warmed. There was a long quiet like a tightened line. No one called, no one texted, no one knocked. That silence didn't lurk. It simply sat down beside him, weighing exactly as much as the coat. The tea light began to cant. The wick had burned short, the wax pooled into a small ring like a shell. The smell of smoke shifted from sweet to sharp, touching the throat like a period made of scent. He bent, cupped the flame with his palm, and blew gently. The flame drew in, quivered once, and went out. A thin thread of smoke coiled up, viscous and lingering like a swallowed sentence. He eased the window open a crack for the smoke to slip out. The tape arched a little and lay back down. In the instant the flame died, darkness took back its place. The kitchen returned to outlines, the living room to quiet blocks, the porch to a wavering yellow dot like a tired eye. He stood and turned the tap down to a lower notch, letting the sound become a thread of breathing there and not there. Passing the refrigerator, he set the crossed-out slip under the fish magnet, laying it behind the "Stay Elsewhere" note like a layer of intention already passed. The binder was still there. The pencil was still there, two silent, steady things. He dropped the coat onto the sofa, folded it as a pillow, pulled the thin blanket over his knees. He neither wished for sleep nor fought wakefulness, only made a truce with the night by choosing a less uncomfortable posture. Somewhere upriver, a horn sounded one long line and drifted away. The refrigerator revved and rested, even as a night watchman who doesn't complain. The taped frame on the door reflected his shadow into gently warped fragments, a person divided into simple geometries, yet still one. He let his body sink into the cushion, eyes open just enough to see the porch light tremble. No more messages, no more calls. And the night, after all, had only to go on with its share of night, slowly, like the thread of smoke once it has thinned to where no acrid smell remains. The motel's night shift front desk was lit by a slightly cold white light. The door glass reflected his shoulder as a thin silhouette cutting across the dark outside. The automatic coffee machine shivered now and then, brown drops falling evenly into a paper cup printed with a deer logo whose paint had peeled in a patch. Mrs. Nora sat behind the counter in a close-fitting gray sweater, a thin white line on her wrist where a ring had once been. Her hand opened a drawer, took out a packet of tissues, and set it beside the cup. Cold night drink, something warm. She didn't ask his name, didn't ask questions. She simply slid toward him, a quiet corner that required no chair. He took the tissue, wiped the rim of the cup, then folded it into a small rectangle and laid it neatly beside it. Nora twirled her pen and along with it passed him a ballpoint, saying nothing more. On the board behind her, a few room keys hung on numbered hooks, quiet as notes of music no one had yet chosen. The front desk smelled of floor cleaner and old coffee, the neutral smell of stories that passed through without leaving a trace. He stood a moment, warming his fingertips over the cup to ease the numbness, and listened to the air conditioner breathe steadily like a well-behaved animal asleep. When he left, he folded the dried tissue and slipped it into his jacket pocket, as if keeping a small piece of warmth for the way back. At noon, Officer DeWitt stopped by as scheduled. 2 knocks on the door, then silence. He opened it and stepped aside. DeWitt was tall, heavy coat, the smell of street wind still clinging to his sleeves. He set a lined logbook on the edge of the table, carefully, as one would set down a level. From his breast pocket, he took a white card edged in blue and a thin sheaf of forms, the corners neatly stapled. You can fill them out slowly. The words fell like a thin blanket laid over a stack of blank paper. No asking why, no pressing for details. Only leaving blank boxes and ruled lines waiting for words. DeWitt paused a beat at the door, glanced through the blue tape where the glass had cracked, then nodded and took his leave. His shoes on the threshold sounded thock-thock, twice, just loud enough, like the signal of work beginning without a starting drum. On the table, the business card caught the light, the name and number printed sharp as a straight road. He set a fingertip on the paper's edge and felt its patient flatness, the way one might touch one's own spine to stand a little straighter. Toward evening, he stopped by the library. The thick glass door hung a sign that read open, the O faded in one section, round, but not quite round. The smell of old paper and hand sanitizer mixed into a dry, mild scent. The librarian from the other day stood behind the circulation desk, hair tied high, one stray strand fallen across her brow. He set both hands on the counter, pushing nothing toward anyone. She looked at him for a second, then reached under the counter and set on it a clear plastic sleeve and a few black binder clips with silver mouths. The gesture of sliding them toward him was as light as pushing a small boat into still water. No offer of help, no questions. Beside them, the photocopier chirped "re" when someone pressed a button. The scan light swept across the sheet, and the newly printed page dropped into the tray with a dry sound like the first raindrops of the season. He carried the sleeve and clips to a table near the window, which looked out on a maple that had shed half its leaves. The last light of day slanted across the smooth wooden tabletop and drew a milky line along the back of the clear sleeve. He tried the clip. The spring gave a tiny snap. The cold metal touched the pad of his finger and left a faint mark. That feeling reassured him in a way hard to name, as if there were now something firm enough to keep a thin stack from being blown apart. He slipped the sleeve into his bag and clipped a blank sheet along with it. The librarian passed by, straightened a stack of magazines, then left on his table a schedule sheet for Thursday online form assistance, without looking at him long. The hands here, he saw, did their part with an indifferent precision. Back home, he laid everything out on the table in his new order. The business card at the upper right corner, the clean stack of blank forms squared beneath it, the clear sleeves set at a slight angle to the left, the binder clips lying still like 4 pebbles weighing down the corners. The tissue from the motel, now flattened, rested beside the worn pencil. No object raised its voice. No object told a story of its own. They sat close together, calm, like a group of people who know how to take their places without stepping on one another's feet. He stood looking for a few seconds, then pulled out a chair and sat. The refrigerator in the corner came on, keeping a steady beat for the whole kitchen. Through the blue tape, the sky deepened. The riverbank looked like a dark cloth ironed smooth. For a moment he thought of a language that needs no mouth, paper with blank boxes, clips with silver mouths, a clear sleeve for protection, a business card like a period in the middle of a sentence. Quiet hands had set the tools in place. His work, from now on, was to put what had happened into its proper compartments so the truth could walk forward without anyone dragging it by the hand. He gathered the items into a small stack, his palm smoothing the paper to chase out trapped bubbles of air. Across the street, the church sign flickered through a few letters, then held steady. Inside the house evidence binder lay parallel to the wood grain, like the backbone of someone who has decided not to speak loudly anymore. No one asked about his private matters today. But their hands, a packet of tissues, a business card, a clear sleeve, a few clips had slid his chair a half step closer to his steadier side. The rest he would leave to the papers, to learn how to have a voice. He came home when the afternoon light had turned a pale gold, just enough to see dust hanging in the air like tiny letters not yet set down on the page. The blue tape on the window pane had deepened into firm diagonals, reflecting a murky slice of river drifting slow. He set the house evidence binder in the middle of the table, pulled out a chair, and arranged what he had brought home in a row: a clear plastic sleeve, a few binder clips with silver mouths, a blue bordered business card, a stack of blank forms. On the tabletop, the old coffee ring still served as a faint brown marker. He rotated the binder so the spine ran parallel to the grain, one straight line, enough to keep his heart from slipping a beat. He opened the binder. The two rings clicked softly, the spring sounding small, like a nod. From the drawer, he took a pad of colored-edged notes, cut on the bias into 5 small tongues. His hand trembled slightly in the little finger, but the cut still ran straight. He set each tab tongue along the margin of a blank sheet, spacing them by eye to make the gaps even, then used a fine pencil to write the name of each section. The pencil line was smooth, no bleeding ink, leaving gray letters clear enough to read, light enough to revise later if needed. The first section read white, scene photos, the second 2 inventory of items, the third, bank transactions, the fourth, a neighbor's camera, the fifth, pawn shops. 5 small paper mouths jutted out like 5 fingers gripping the edge of the table, ready to keep things from sliding to the floor on his behalf. He slid a sheet of heavy paper into the clear sleeve and tested it back and forth. The plastic's faint scuff on the paper sounded like a breath held short. At the top right corner of each page, he drew a small box in pencil for time and date. He checked his watch and wound back to the marks he'd memorized. When he discovered the broken glass, when he made the first 911 call, when he reached the motel, when Officer DeWitt knocked, when he stopped by the library. Numbers don't tell a story, but they know how to stand upright. 1942, broken glass, fingerprint powder, 2015 911 call, 2305 motel, 1130 DeWitt, 1610 library. He wrote each timestamp small along the page edge, the script slanting only a little, like labeling the invisible nails holding a frame. In the scene photos section, he placed a title sheet first: location, date, time window, weather. He had no prints yet, so he wrote, for now, will print USB, and clipped on a small sticky note so he wouldn't forget. He sketched a 3-column grid for pasting photos later. Glass door, lock, tabletop coffee ring, pry marks. In the next section, inventory of items, he ruled the left column for item name, the middle for condition marks, the right for notes. The first lines appeared. Ella's silver ring inscription inside. Small radio scuffed at left corner. Small wooden box loose latch. After each line, he set the pencil down for half a second, letting his breath catch up. In bank transactions, he left the first 3 pages blank, numbered the bottom corners 135, and wrote at the edge, print statements from last week to now. Beside that, he drew a thin arrow toward the notes column for marking any irregular timing, if any. In neighbor's camera, he prepared 2 clear sleeves in advance, and along the page edge wrote the line, permission name house, number time window. He thought of the door frame across the street that once held a red geranium pot. The man who watered in the evenings likely left the porch light on rather long. He knew he would knock at a decent hour and let the papers speak first. In pawn shops, he listed the names of the three nearest, leaving space to add addresses, the person at the counter, related items. Next to it, he placed DeWitt's business card so that, when he went, he'd have a number to call back if needed. The worn pencil rasped very softly on the paper. That small sound eased the scratch in his throat from the candle smoke earlier. On the porch, the light still flickered in short circuits. The broken shine fell on the page in blinking bands, making the letters seem to rise and sink. He angled the binder to avoid the spill of light, his palm smoothing to press out the bubbles under the plastic. He closed the binder part way to feel the heft of a book with a backbone. The spine gave a small, certain note, the clear sleeve, the clips, the colored edge tabs lined up like a troop that doesn't know how to lie. He pulled the cracked armrest chair closer, sat a little lower so his back touched the table edge, opened the binder again, and rehearsed presentation. His finger slid to the first tab, then the second, then the third, like practicing in front of a mirror. With each turn, he paused half a beat at the sheet's edge to let his eyes shift their weight. He imagined the quiet space of a room before him, where there would be few words and much paper. This practice was not to defeat anyone, only to keep himself from speaking off course. At the margin of a few pages, he added notes for small moves. Photograph Primark's oblique angle. Place measuring tape by gauge measure. Print photos matte paper. No color correction. Record position, distance from handle to crack. The bullet points thinned the sense of helplessness. Each small task a rung. Beside the binder, he set a lens cloth, a roll of clear tape, a fine-tipped marker, the toolkit of someone who will let the truth stand on its own. On the refrigerator, the slip "Stay elsewhere, a few days, change the lock tomorrow morning," still held under the fish magnet. He stepped over and penciled at the lower corner, "Buy porch bulb." Back at the table, he set the pencil down a little apart, just enough to soothe the hand's urge to clench. From the door gap, river wind slipped in and made the edge of a sheet inside the sleeve lift as if breathing. He laid his palm on the binder's spine and felt a just right temperature, neither hot nor cold, like the back of a friend when you stand close. From the threshold looking in, the room was not much different from the morning. The wooden table, the old coffee ring, the coat smelling of wood and machine oil hanging by the door, the chair with the cracked armrest. Only now there was a binder that knew how to name its parts. In his head, a quiet sentence clicked into place, needing no writing down. Evidence first, feelings later. That sentence didn't snuff the feelings. It only set them on the neighboring chair and poured them a warm cup to wait. And he, tonight, would sit with the papers until the ruled lines were strong enough to hold a house. Morning opened with a thin layer of mist on the river, pale gold skimming across the blue tape on the glass, making the diagonals suddenly as clear as pencil strokes freshly sharpened. He washed his face with cold water, dried it slowly, then set the house evidence binder in the middle of the table. The worn pencil lay beside it, ready like a small needle to stitch torn seams back together. He began at the door. Setting the phone close to the pry mark on the frame, he turned his body to find the oblique morning light that would bring out the metal groove. A coin was placed beside the scratch. Then a length of tape measure clicked out to touch the wood's edge so the photo would have a scale to lean on. He shot close, shot from a distance, shot at an angle. Each press was a dry, short click, like tapping a period into the morning. On the edge of the sticky note inside the binder, he drew one line. 7:22 photos of Primark, porch light flickering. The pencil bit into the fine paper fiber, leaving a soft gray trace like steady breathing. Inside, he photographed the tabletop with the old coffee ring, the taped frame with the scratch cutting across the smile, the drawer mouth that had once been pulled askew, not to complain, but so that tomorrow, the day after, when memory dulled, the pages would still point to the exact places where things had happened. He opened the phone, saved the photos under one, Scene Photos, then pulled up a chair and opened the two Inventory of Items section. The pencil began to run evenly. Ella's silver ring engraving on the inside, worn at the edge, small radio scuffed at left corner, wooden box loose latch, horizontal grain, pocket watch lid slightly nicked, engraved 1979, three silver dollars, scratched like a fish hook, old perfume bottle cracked cap, screwdriver set missing head gnome 3. The letters were small, in line, not crowding, each entry spaced a breath apart. He opened his phone and scrolled to the bank messages. Notifications slid down the screen. Cash withdrawals, card swipes, the times captured like small stakes planted along a bank. He plugged a USB into the old computer, saved the screenshots into the folder 3 transactions, and renamed each file by hour and minute. 1956, 2003, 22:41. At the page margin, he wrote, Print statement convenience store, underline strange transactions. The underline was so thin you had to tilt the paper to see it, like keeping the volume of anger below the audible threshold. Before leaving the house, he stopped by the bakery on the way to the gas station and bought half a dozen donuts. The wrapper was still warm, the smell of oil and sugar mixed with flour, like a kind of candy for meetings that don't know how to begin. The paper bag swung in his hand, making a dry rustle like leaves. The first pawn shop had thick glass on the door, a slightly skewed neon open, and a worn wooden counter polished by people's elbows. He set the bag of donuts on the counter's edge and nodded. No lament, no display. He opened the clear sleeve and slid out a form with boxes, name, item details, date lost, contact number. The pencil made a small dot beside the line, silver ring engraving inside. The clerk behind the counter dark lacquered nails, a small flower tattooed on her wrist, looked at the description, then looked in the back. No promise, only a light nod. He wrote Wait 31 along the margin of 5 Pawn Shops Number 1, clipped it. The warm donut left a round oil mark on the brown paper, a soft dot of kindness to make the inquiry less stiff. The second shop was smaller, fluorescent light casting a green tint on the skin, the display glass reflecting no credit repeated to absurdity. He repeated the moves, squared the description sheet, and set beside it a thin printout from the USB-A photo of the ring on Ella's hand years ago, cut from a picture taken on a sunny day. No one said, I know. No one said, let me see. But the clerk's eyes slowed over the photo. He set the donut bag down and nudged it inward, as if adding a little sugar to something inherently bitter. 0905 shop. Number 2, he wrote at the edge. In a corner of the case, an identification slip peeking from behind the glass made his heart dip a beat and then hold. He didn't snap back into anger. The binder would know how to hold a place for that beat when needed. The third shop sat by the bus station, a wind chime at the door clicking softly. A salt and pepper bearded man bent over a ledger, a ballpoint pen laid crosswise to hold the page. He presented briefly, mostly by handing over papers. The man glanced through, went into the back, rummaged for a while, and returned shaking his head slowly. He didn't sag. He opened the bag, set 2 donuts on a white tissue. Nafsteven shop number 3. He added another line, then closed the binder. The disappointment wasn't noisy. It was like a faint shadow sliding across the glass, leaving behind a room full of jumbled things still standing. At the convenience store, the self-serve photo printer flashed color frames. He plugged in the USB and chose no color correction, matte paper, 10x15. The screen asked for quantity. He chose more than one, having learned that papers also need backups. The machine purred as it fed the paper. The photos spilled out like small train tickets. Pry mark, coffee ring, scratched frame, close-up of the coin by the scratch, the bank message screenshots. He laid them on the metal table, straightened each edge with his palm, pressed out the fresh print curl. Each sheet went into a clear sleeve, the leftover air pushed out with the edge of a card. In the lower right corner, he placed a tiny pencil dot, like the signature of a custodian who doesn't want to show off. Back home, he opened one Scene Photos and pasted the pictures in chronological order. Each photo had a fine caption line: 0722 glass door low angle, 0725 lock Primark, 0731 table coffee ring. In 3 transactions, the printed messages were clipped into a stack, the odd entries marked by a vertical pencil line at the margin, not red, not heavy, just enough for the eye to follow. 5 pawn shops received 3 sheets, each with address, visit time, clerk's name, and a small donuts note like a climate annotation. His hand was damp under the plastic sleeve. He dried it with the edge of a clean cloth and set the pencil back into the groove of the spine. On the porch, the light still flickered, but inside, the tabbed pages stood in line like newly driven stakes along the bank. He stepped back half a pace and looked at the binder. Gathering evidence, he saw, isn't gathering anger. It is the way of crossing the town with slow feet, setting each small thing back where it belongs: a pen, a photograph, a donut. Kindness doesn't make the file any lighter, but it keeps the hand holding it from shaking. And when he set the binder down, the edge touched the old coffee ring's snug fit. He knew he had added one more rung to the morning. He got home when the sun had slipped to the far side of the river. The evening light caught on the edge of the blue tape on the window pane as a thin line. The room kept the smell of fresh prints from the convenience store mixed with the sugary oil of the opened donut bag. He set the house evidence binder on the table, ran a finger along the spine to square it, then went to fetch the small half-full bottle of machine oil from the cabinet under the sink. The living room door hinge gave a thin sound when he pushed it. He dropped 2 beads onto the pin, waited for them to sink in, then pushed lightly. The old sound slipped away like a thorn drawn from skin. He wiped the overflow with the corner of an old kitchen towel, folding it in so it wouldn't smear onto the handle. He tested the door 3 times. It was as quiet as a breath after recovery. He moved on to the porch door and repeated the motions drop by drop, push by push. The creak retreated into the house's memory. On the porch, the bulb still flickered. He braced a wooden chair firmly against the wall, gripped the door frame to stand up, and unscrewed the old bulb slowly. The glass body warm, dust gathered in a thin ring near the base. The new bulb came from a paper box in the odds and ends drawer, left hand steadying, right hand turning clockwise, the threads meeting with a sound like 2 late-night tones finding each other. The switch clicked, the gold light held steady, no flicker. He stood 1 second more, watched the fixed light pour down the step and pool on the tape's edge, then exhaled as if he had just sealed a small promise. Back inside, he set 2 chairs in the living room to face each other, far enough apart to take a low table between them. The chair with the cracked armrest faced the taped window, the spot where he would sit. The opposite chair was drawn slightly into the pool of the ceiling light. He slid the chair legs so they matched the old worn marks on the tile. The neat scrape sounded like someone laying tables before opening time. He squared the thin rug so its border ran parallel to the table's edge. He laid 2 white tissues neatly on the table, beside a black ballpoint pen that still had ink. At the corner of the table, he placed the binder, opened already in left-to-right order. 1, scene photos, lay first, then 2, inventory of items, 3, bank transactions, 4, neighbor's camera, 5, pawn shops. He tested sliding each sheet, pausing at the edge so the clips wouldn't spring up. Not much rehearsal, just making sure nothing would catch. The binder closed again, resting at a slant like a body waiting for the right moment to stand. He went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the gas. The flame was small and even, blue. While he waited, he washed the porcelain cup, dried its rim, then set the cup in the old coffee ring on the wooden tabletop, the faint brown halo hugging the base just right, like an arm's familiar loop. The water boiled, bubbling like fingernails tapping on metal. He made coffee and poured slowly. The warmth rose and dampened his eyes. He set the warm cup on the low table between the 2 chairs, added a plate of biscuits left from last week, broke one so the buttery smell would spread and soften the machine oil still lingering in the house. No name for that cup of coffee. It was there for whoever needed the warmth of something old. He looked around. The taped-up frame on the wall stood straight, the drawer mouth closed to its familiar notch. The kitchen towel was back on its hook, the rug no longer puckered at the corner. A small scale of order had just been played. He wiped the tabletop with a damp cloth and stopped when the grain caught the light in a thin, long line. In the house, the refrigerator cycled on and off, keeping time for his preparations. He picked up his phone. On the screen, DeWitt's name sat in recent calls. Below it was the unknown number for pawn shop number 2. He opened messages and typed the words one by one, his eyes following the steady porch light outside as if borrowing its certainty. Tomorrow evening at my house. There will be a witness. I'll let the document speak. You only need to sit. He read it once, added no exclamation point, no further explanation. Send. The screen showed sent, then went quiet. He laid the phone face down, slid it off to the table's edge so any vibration wouldn't touch this setting in place. He penciled on a small slip stuck beside the wall calendar. DeWitt, 1830. A little arrow pointed down to the line. Set chairs, pour hot water 10 minutes beforehand. The pale gray letters were enough for him. No one else needed to understand. He went to the window and opened it a crack so the coffee could drift out. River wind edged in and stirred the curtain just so enough to hear tomorrow night passing by. When he turned back, he adjusted the curtain to cut the glare on the binder's surface. He rotated the clip mouths so they would open without a snap. On the table, DeWitt's blue-bordered card lay beside a blank sheet bearing the line, "Use few words." He touched the pen tip down, then lifted it, leaving the page still white. The evidence would speak. His job was to reduce the extra noise. At the end, he stood in the living room doorway and took it in. 2 chairs facing, a low table, a warm cup sending up a thin breath, the binder closed, the porch light steady, laying a gold shard on the tape. He touched the doorframe once, like a hand to a friend's shoulder. The hollowness of yesterday remained, but it strayed less when there was a room ready to listen without talking back. He switched off the kitchen light, letting the porch's gold and the soft ceiling lamp together lift the dark. At this chassant, the preparation could be considered done. The doors don't squeak, the bulb doesn't flicker, the papers are in line. A cup of coffee is warm enough. The rest he left to silence to hold the words until there came a knock at the door. Nothing more. The living room was tidy, like a piece of music tuned before the performance. 2 chairs faced each other. On the low table between them sat a single cup of coffee, still warm, a thin thread of steam. The house evidence binder lay open from left to right, the paper tabs jutting out like 5 fingers waiting to take hold of the story. The porch light held steady, pouring through the blue tape and laying a thin band of gold along the table's edge. The outer door closed with a small thock. His son stepped in, eyes bruised like 2 smudged ink stains, coat open at the throat, a faint smell of cigarettes preceding him by half a step. He stopped at the room's threshold between light and dark, the ceiling lamp throwing a weary tint across his cheekbones. DeWitt followed a beat behind, dark coat, a blue-backed logbook in his hand. He set the book on the table's edge, squared it to the wood grain, then laid the pen along the first ruled line like a neutral marker. No one pulled out a chair for anyone. Each found his own place, as if they had practiced how not to step on the other's voice. He took the chair with the cracked armrest, back straight, his hand resting on the binder's spine as one might lay a hand on the back of a gentle animal. The son sat opposite, knees together, eyes skimming the coffee cup and then looking away, his thumb rubbing the edge of a bare nail. DeWitt wrote the time in the upper corner of the page, his pen even, then looked up and gave a small nod, a motion enough to say, "Begin." First section. 1. Scene photos. He slid out the first clear sleeve and pushed it into the light between them. Photos of the taped glass door, of the lock with the pry groove, of the old coffee ring beside the drawer off its notch, each with a thin timestamp line beneath. The steady lamp made the metal scratch catch the light like a straight ruled line. His fingertip touched the corner of the first print and tapped a very soft tock, a signal beat. This is where it starts. The son glanced over them, his eyes stopping at the coin placed beside the pry mark in the photo, as if weighing whether that small reference point truly existed. DeWitt leaned in and let his pen make another small tick at the margin of the log. Second section, 2. Inventory of items. The small, even lines. Silver ring engraved inside. Radio scuffed at the corner. Wooden box with a loose latch. Pocket watch. He met no one's eyes, letting the straight pencil letters stand in for him. A photo, cut from an old picture, was fixed at the margin. Ella's hand lifting a glass, the ring flashing a speck of light, captioned, "Sunny Day Photo Reference." He slid the sheet down half a centimeter so the person opposite could read without having to bend. No accusation, no naming of feelings. At the far end of the table, the son swallowed dryly. The taste of smoke lingering on his tongue didn't know how to answer any of the words. Third section, 3. Bank transactions. The printed message slips laid out by time, 1956, 2003, 2241. Each odd entry was marked by a vertical pencil line at the margin. He slid the stack out, touched the top corner with his finger, and gave a light tap. The refrigerator's hum from the kitchen kept a steady beat. As if to spare the room from hearing too clearly one person's heartbeat, DeWitt's eyes moved from paper to face and back again, like someone gauging the wind by a thread tied to a branch. Fourth section, 4. Neighbor's camera. A frame still from the house across the street, the license plate of a car that stopped briefly at the hidden edge, brake lights laying a thin red patch on the wet pavement. Beneath the image was the line, "Permission House, number 22 window, 38-4. He pushed the frame to the center. His fingernail touched the plastic sleeve with a faint tack, like clipping paper into the right place. The son leaned back, his heel touched the floor once, and then stayed, his gaze coming apart as if searching for some other crack to slip into. DeWitt tilted his notebook and drew a line parallel to the edge, the pen making no sound. The fifth section he did not open yet. He closed the binder halfway, leaving the tab 5 pawn shops, showing like a mouth not yet speaking. On the table, the coffee steamed less and less. A bead of condensation at the rim gathered into a single clear drop, then detached and ran down the porcelain in a fine line. He realigned the stack of statements to sit flush with the scene photos, like bringing notes back into the same key. Throughout those motions, the room held only 3 sounds: DeWitt's pen rubbing paper, the slow breathing of an old man, and the scrape of cloth on a chair when a young man braced an elbow. Anger, if any remained, he kept caged in, squaring the page edges, in the light tap at a photo's corner, in the way he let no extra word slip out. His eyes stayed on the lines of time, not lingering on the bruised eyes opposite. When his right hand trembled briefly, his left settled on the binder's spine, turning the trimmer into the act of holding a book open. DeWitt looked up exactly once, met his eyes, and nodded. The pen lay crosswise at the top of the page, the sign of someone who had seen enough to follow the rest. Outside, the porch light still held steady, casting a thin slice of gold onto the binder. In that gold, the paper seemed to speak in a low, even voice. "This is the time. This is the place. This is the hour." He slid the coffee cup half a hand's breadth toward the opposite chair, not an invitation, not a push, one gesture enough to say the room was ready to listen even if no one drank. He set the tip of his index finger on the corner of the last tab and waited half a breath. The camera, still in the middle of the table, stayed open, the band of license numbers clear as a line of bold type. The living room was as tidy as at the start. The binder lay open from left to right. No word of accusation, no sentence needing explanation. Only a fingertip tapping lightly on the corner of a page, a beat inviting the truth to step forward and the rest of the room, and of the night, to fall into the places that had been waiting. He leaned back in the chair, the corners of his mouth gone hard. Not related. The 2 words fell into the room like a paper knife, not sharp, but enough to slice the remaining warmth at the cup's rim in 2. He didn't meet the boy's eyes. His right hand rested on the binder's spine. His left reached out and flipped the last tab as one would lift a thin curtain. The clear sleeve slid forward by inches, the steady porch light throwing itself onto the surface of a photo. It was Ella's ring, the silver band worn thin at the edge, the engraving inside gleaming quietly under the pawn shop number two's fluorescent case lights. The photo was tight, the glass counter stamped with arcing white marks, the frame cropped into the edge of the identification slip. Item number, symbol, intake date. The clerk scrawled signature. He set the photo in the middle of the table and nudged it square to the wood grain. His forefinger tapped the margin of the slip-talk once. DeWitt slid his logbook closer, pen tipping as if to record the absent outline of a confession. There were no questions. He only slid out one more print, a shot of the case from a distance, the corner of the glass reflecting the neon open and the red brim of the cap he'd worn while standing opposite. In the lower right, the camera's fine time stamp, Unais 5. DeWitt slowly set a fingertip on that line and then lifted it, like checking a pulse at the wrist through a thick sleeve. The sun looked down, then away, then down again. His hand worked at the edge of the chair until his nail snapped a dry sound against the wood. He searched for no words to bridge the gap between image and person. Anger, like a leashed animal, yanked hard and then lay still under his sternum. He reached for the phone lying face down on the table's edge and flipped it over. The screen lit, reflecting the blue tape on the door like a reminder mark. He pressed 911. His fingertip did not shake. When the line connected, his voice was as even as a margin rule. Name, address, in confrontation at home, a witness present. Evidence includes case photo and ID slip from shop number 2. Each phrase dropped small and clear, with no filler words. While he spoke, DeWitt had already lifted his radio. No rush, no embellishing a single sentence. He confirmed the address, noted the door would be open, and requested a unit according to procedure. The pen was laid crosswise at the top of the page, the log folded halfway, like an arm drawn in to make space for the feet that would enter this room in a few minutes. The sun cupped his hand over his mouth, his eyelids flickering to the rhythm of someone trying to blur a picture lying flat on the table, but paper doesn't smudge. A short wait. The car stopping on the porch made the tape's edge on the glass tremble softly. DeWitt stood, went to the door, and turned the lock with a practiced motion. 2 blues entered, their footfalls no louder than the refrigerator's cycle. The exchange was only enough for the report. Confirm the name. Please stand, turn around. The son offered his wrists a beat slower, then faster than his own glance. The sound of metal closing on his wrists was very small, small as a spoon touching a cup. Ting, clean, without a lingering ring. He stayed in the chair with the cracked armrest, hands laced together. No one told him to stand, and no one needed him to. DeWitt stepped back to clear the way. The porch light leaned a gold sliver over the stair. The sun looked across at him for a moment too brief to become a question. He answered by setting his fingertip on the corner of the plastic sleeve, keeping the photo from sliding. The door hinge, oiled yesterday, closed nearly in silence. Only when the latch caught did the room recognize a round, neat click, like a period at the end of a line. People and shoe sounds receded. The porch light held steady. Inside, the refrigerator kept time and the smell of coffee remained. The cup, still warm moments ago, was now only a whiff at the rim. He drew in a breath, deep and slow, as if walking a long corridor newly handed back to quiet. On the table, the coffee cooled fast, the thin thread of steam gone mute. A bead of condensation at the lip fell down the porcelain, leaving a chill track. He rotated the cup a fraction to nest it back in the brown ring on the wood, not out of fussiness, only to give his hand something to do other than shake. DeWitt closed the log, set his business card back in its proper place, the upper right corner. He asked with his eyes without opening his mouth. He answered with the lightest nod. A verbal report, enough for now. DeWitt touched the pen tip to the notebook's edge in a small salute, then went out. The door closed softly behind him. The opposite chair was empty. The tissue laid beside it was as it had been, no handprint, no crumbs. By the book. The phrase passed through his mind like the printed key signature at the start of a score, on time, on beat, all the notes. But the living room wasn't warmer for it. His anger had been kept and resolved by habit. Flip a tab, slide a photo, dial the number. When it withdrew, it left no cheer, only a bearable space, the interval between a cup cooling quickly and the frame on the wall. He turned his palm up on the binder's spine and felt the cover cool as a river's surface. His eye slid to the fine time in the photo corner, 0905, then rested where the engraving inside the ring showed in the close-up. The letters couldn't be read in the photo, but he remembered each stroke, worn, old, and not lost. On the refrigerator, the change the lock slip still hung under the fish magnet. He stood, ran the tap to fill the cup halfway, not to drink, but to hear the sound of water on porcelain. Beyond the glass, the river flowed as if nothing had just happened inside. He set the cup back in the old ring, this time not hunting long for the fit. His hand drew the binder closed. The paper spine gave off a thin breath. In the room, everything returned to place, the two chairs facing, the low table, the steady porch light, the blue tape shouldering another season of wind. He looked to where his son had sat, a faint hollow in the cushion, the smell of smoke hanging at the edge of the light. No speech was given, no line needed reply. The exhibits had spoken for the people. The rest, at least for now, was to reach out and turn off the stove, draw the curtain to blunt the glare, and sit a while with the coffee's warmth slipping out of the room like a passing heat, enough to know it had been, and enough calm to watch it fade. The first envelope arrived on a morning quiet as compressed mist. The recipient line was bolded, the postmark stamped askew, the paper edge a little frayed by the night rain. He poured coffee, set the cup into the brown ring on the tabletop, then opened the envelope with the dull spine of a knife so as not to nick the paper inside. It was a court notice, date, time, a note field reading statement received, installment schedule enclosed. The print was even, the paper cool, the smell of fresh ink like the breath of a distant room. He placed the sheet in the binder, smoothed a finger along the plastic edge to chase out bubbles, and wrote in pencil at the margin, Week 1, read. He didn't hurry to be glad. He didn't look for a place for anger to pass through either. A few days later, the second envelope, the first transfer receipt, a small sum, enough to thin one corner of worry. He drew a fine line on the wall calendar, marked the square for that week without using a red pen. At night, he opened the 3 bank transactions section to recheck the printed lines. The refrigerator kicked on like a night watchman changing shifts, steady and quiet. On another afternoon, there was a thinner sheet, a counseling schedule for addiction. The time slots stacked down the page like newly set steps. He taped that sheet to the refrigerator door with a strip of clear tape right under the chipped tailfish magnet and added in the corner, showing up on time is a way to keep your back straight. When he finished writing, he sat down and listened to himself not let out a good or a late. There was only steady breathing and the minute hand passing a fine mark on the wall clock's face. The binder thickened by a knuckle as new printouts and receipts were clipped in. On the day he decided to move it to the lower drawer, the light was just bright enough for dust to glitter in the slanting beam. He closed the binder. The rings touched with a neat, small click. The paper spine decisive, like someone folding a shirt away at season's end. He cleaned the drawer, set the binder inside next to a lens cloth and a worn pencil with half a body left. The movement was slow and sure, like returning someone who'd recovered to a bed in the inner room. From now on, when needed, he would pull it out. Otherwise, it would mostly lie still and breathe by means of letters. At noon, he washed Ella's old quilt. The quilt drank water and grew heavy in the hands. The scent of detergent mixed with the smell of old fabric rose mild and soft. He ran his palms along the frayed seams, as if the needle were still hidden somewhere inside the cloth. He wrung the quilt, and water plopped onto the cement, leaving faint tracks like a road through rain. He carried the quilt to the porch, looped it over the line, and clipped the 4 corners firm. Sun touched it, and the sun-warmed smell rose in a thin layer hard to name but recognizable to anyone settling lightly on each old seam, making the old glint like a memory having its hair brushed. The porch light held steady, pouring a warm stripe along the quilt's edge, the river wind passing through to puff it as if a rib cage were practicing calm breathing outside the house. In the kitchen, he washed the porcelain cup, set it on the rack to dry, then set it back down into the old ring. The taped-up frame on the wall no longer wore dust. The scratch still cut across the smile, but the eyes in the photo, thanks to noon sun, looked deeper. He didn't talk to the frame, and he didn't bow his head to pray. He only walked past, touched the tape edge lightly to make it smoother, then stood a little straighter. The tile floor shone from a pass with the rag, the door hinges silent since the oiling. The coat smelling of wood and machine oil still hung by the door. Now and then he gave it a shake, and dust fell like fine rain. On the table, the scissors, the roll of clear tape, the tissues, all were in their places, none crowding another. On afternoons with little wind, he cracked the door so fresh air could slide through the edge where the blue tape crossed enough for the curtain to stir softly, not enough to budge the papers on the table. The wall clock's sound, for that reason, came forward clearly. Tick, tock, tick, tock, even like a friend in the next room, reminding him that time keeps doing its part, without favor, without cutting in. On the days with envelopes, he tore them open the old way, read everything, folded along the pre-printed crease, clipped the sheet into its section, then closed the drawer. On the days without envelopes, he still made coffee, sat in the chair with the cracked armrest, and ran his fingers along the crack like someone checking the health of a branch after a cold season. Sometimes he counted the tiles under the chair from here to the door, 11.5. Sometimes he simply sat, listening to children laugh up the street, a broom sweep across the sidewalk, a barge horn draw a tired line along the river. No victory was hung on the wall. By the book showed up only as numbers on receipts, evening out, as the counseling schedule taped in its place, as the binder knowing to step back into the lower drawer. The emptiness after when the footsteps had gone, when the ting had faded, he divided into actions, airing the quilt, folding a cloth, changing the water in the vase, holding the dry twig on the table. With each task done, the house quieted one notch more, like a surface of water after a pebble sinks with no ripple. One late afternoon, he pulled the chair near the window and sat watching the quilt sway. The sun scent had soaked in. The quilt felt lighter, as if it had let go of some old water. He unpinned it and folded along the creases, each crease pressed firm as if packing away a portion of the day now past. Carrying it inside, he spread the quilt over the sofa, ran his hand along a seam, and stopped where the thread had loosened to tuck the edge in, not sewing yet. This could wait till tomorrow, like a pleasant kind of debt. When evening came, the gold withdrew from the step, leaving a cool streak at the door's foot. He switched on the soft ceiling light, turned the porch light off and on again to test its steadiness. The glow still held. The binder lay in the lower drawer, near enough to reach, far enough not to take the dinner's place. He poured a glass of water and set it beside the coffee cup, already dried. Somewhere in the house the clock went evenly, neither loud nor quiet, twined with the refrigerator's cycle into a background score a person living alone could trust. He sat down, leaned back, palms laid on his knees. No done. Feeling leapt up, and no aftershock of anger lingered. There was only a rhythm of life returning to its straight part. Outside the window, the river slid through the dark like a black ribbon, a few distant lights pinned on it like grains. Inside, the sun's smell still clung to the quilt, the scent of freshly opened paper held on at the table's corner. The old machine oil smell reminded him that tomorrow there was still work to do. He closed his eyes and breathed to the tick-tock, understanding that tonight no witness was needed anymore. Only this house, the small things at rest, and a clock that runs evenly, enough for him to stay with his portion, no more, no less. He cut a small slip of paper from the last page of the notebook, the kind of paper with faint grain like the surface of a river on a windless day. The pencil wore down one more notch as he wrote each word, slowly and in straight lines. From now on, let the evidence speak, the rest, time. The period sat still like a pebble placed on the bank. He fixed the slip to the refrigerator with the chipped tail fish magnet, smoothing lightly to flatten the air bubbles. When he stepped back half a pace, the gray pencil letters came clear and then softened in the afternoon light, like a quiet law hung where people open the door every day. On the porch, the replaced bulb stood steady. A band of gold poured evenly over the step. No more awkward flickers like the days before. The light now was like a steady breath. He nudged the two straight-backed wooden chairs, a hand's width closer to each other. The chair feet rasped softly on the tile, like someone drawing a thread. The space between the two chairs remained, only smaller enough that a conversation, if it appeared, wouldn't have to climb over a deep gap. He set no coffee cup on the little table between them, only a clean coaster, an empty object, but one that could wait. Inside, the binder lay in the lower drawer. When he closed it, his hand held the edge for a beat, listening to the soft slide of wood like an exhale that had had time to calm. The taped frame on the wall still kept the scratch cutting across the smile. With his thumb, he stroked along the tape's edge, checking the stick the way one checks a wound that has sealed over. On the table, the old coffee ring wasn't wiped away. He accepted it there as a fixed marker. There had been a time of sway, there had been a time of hold. River wind blew in through the cracked open door, carrying the smell of sun still clinging to the quilt folded on the sofa. The clock's tick and the refrigerator starting, then resting, braided into two beats that held the house upright. He looked at the slip on the refrigerator and saw the word time seem to lengthen by an arm's span as the afternoon slid across the letters. No command, no promise, only a guideline sufficient for someone who knows how to read slowly. He went out to the porch and tried sitting in one of the two chairs he had just drawn together. From here, looking into the house, the blue tape on the panes sketched diagonals that had become familiar, like the ruled squares of a notebook left mid-sentence. He set both hands on his knees and let his palms warm on the cloth of his pants. The small front yard was still. A dry leaf rolled across and stopped at the foot of the steps. In the distance, the church's electric sign blinked a few letters with missing bulbs. Nearer, the late afternoon garbage truck went down a street 2 intersections away. The town kept doing its part, asking nothing of anyone. He stepped back in, took a cloth, and wiped a streak of dust from the back of the opposite chair, a gesture like welcoming someone who might or might not stop by. On the small table, he set a sheet of white paper cut to the size of a hand, left blank. It was there as a place for an apology should one day appear, or it might simply be a place to set a hello so it wouldn't come out clumsy. No need to write it in advance. Before evening died entirely, he returned to the refrigerator and added a thin underline beneath the word evidence, not heavy, only so that tomorrow his eye wouldn't skim past too fast. When he looked up, he caught his reflection fractured on the taped glass, an image split into pale triangles, yet still whole. He touched the doorframe once, like laying a hand on his own shoulder to remind himself. A shore has been crossed. The phone lay face down, silent. He didn't turn it over. A knock, if it came, would be heard whether he was in the kitchen pouring water or on the porch brushing a hand along the rail. He walked slowly through the living room, straightened the rug's corner, shimmied the table legs so it wouldn't wobble, stacked the tissues neatly in their box. These acts didn't go by the name of waiting. They simply opened a path so what might come wouldn't catch on the edge of the table. On the porch, the light still held steady. He drew the two chairs a finger's width closer measured. The new distance was enough for those sitting to hear each other without raising their voices. Then he stepped back and tried to see the pair of chairs as an outsider would. No promise, no staging, only a just right space between two backs, where a knock at the door, if it came, wouldn't have to wonder where to sit. When the sky darkened, he closed the porch door to a crack, letting a thin streak of gold lie on the tile, one that led from the threshold to the exact place of the two chairs. In the kitchen, he poured half a cup of warm water and set it on the empty coaster between them as a test run. A thin thread of steam rose, then faded. He turned off the ceiling light and let the room breathe by two sources just enough, the porch and the refrigerator. In that light, the slip on the fridge door was neither harsh nor dim. It became part of the furnishings, like the handle of the lower drawer, there to be used, not displayed. Hope, he thought, need not carry a bell. It is like the porch light holding steady this evening. No tremor, no assertion, just casting a piece of gold enough that the late won't trip. He sat in the chair with the cracked armrest and lightly stroked the crack, as one might touch a scar that no longer hurts. Across the table, the chair was still empty. He left that chair empty, left the coaster empty, left the sheet of paper empty. Those empty spaces neither draw nor repel. They simply keep a place. Night fell. The river blackened into a long, soundless strip. Inside, the clock kept even time. The refrigerator started and rested. The porch light didn't blink. He looked through the door and listened to the quiet approach, stopping right before the step like a guest who knows the hour. At a level just enough not to break, Hope sat down beside him, not hugging, not speaking, leaving in the air a slight warmth, hard to see, yet present. And the house, after all, had inched its chairs a little closer toward a knock that might come, whenever time found it fitting. In the end, no one wins by shouting. There is only the porch light holding steady, the binder resting in the lower drawer, the coffee ring fitting the cup's base just right, and the two chairs pulled a half-hand's width closer together. Revenge here, if one must name it, is the way a grown person sets a boundary down, lightly but surely. Let the evidence speak. Let kindness be the lock. Let silence be in the place that belongs to silence. The rest, leave to time. If you've ever gone through a night like this, what was the first thing you set back in its place? A porch light, a note, or simply the way you sit up straight before the truth? If you wish, leave a small detail in a comment, an object, a habit, a sentence you wrote for yourself. Perhaps that very small thing will help someone out there stand steady quietly and for the long haul.